Our second discussion would be how are we going to express the different economic relationship. This is a topic wherein with all the theories and decision sciences that we're going to use in solving certain management problems and issues, we have to express them, or we have to make a distinction about or regarding the different variables or factors that are involved in that kind of issues or theories, so that we could come up with a certain kind of solution. So how are we going to do? Now, expressing an economic relationship means making a certain equations or functions that tells us how is the other factor related to the other factor, or how does one factor affects the other factor. So in this case, we could come up with a great solution so that we could also achieve what is the most objective or a certain objective of a certain company's business or a certain organizations. So in expressing an economic relationship, that means we have to use uh, mathematical expressions. The theory can now be expressed through a mathematical equations. So if we have, for example, a consumer theory, how are we going to express them so that we could explain further the different factors affecting the consumers? So that is how we are going to express economic relationship. So in this one is just an example of an expressing an economic relationship, because there are many ways. But first, let's start on the revenue side or the income side that a certain business or an organization acquires during an operations, or during its process of productions. Okay, a revenue is somewhat expressed through an equation of total revenue is equivalent to a price times a quantity. So with this one, we could actually express them with the functions that it is here. But looking at the expression, if we would say total revenue, so total revenue here could actually be expressed by a price times a quantity. There. Okay, wherein an example of this equation is the total revenue is equivalent to 100q minus q squared. Wherein in this equation, we are expressing a two certain kinds of factors, wherein the revenue one and then the quantity one on the other side. These factors could now tell us what could be the possible relationship of this one. Now, this could be tell that there would be a certain positive relationship, or there could be a certain negative relationship. Now, the relationship depends on how does a certain equation behaves itself. So we have here the sign of the negative, or we could have a sign of a positive. That could tell us a certain relationship of the two. But it does not always mean that a negative sign will always have a negative relationship and a positive sign will always have a positive relationship. Take note that in a simple math, a negative times a negative will always be a positive, and a positive multiplied by a negative will become a negative. So it does not always mean that a negative sign has always indicates a negative relationship. Okay, so by looking at the equation, it just simply means that a quantity on the other side, which is signed as q here, could affect the total revenue, and the total revenue behaves according to the movement of the quantities on the other side of the function. So that's how you're going to analyze a certain kind of equations. So, meaning when we say expressing economic relationship, this actually helps us how are we going to analyze or interpret a certain equation, so that we could determine which strategy are we going to take in, which decision are we going to take in. Now, if you're going to look at the equation, it is actually could be expressed through tables also or through a graph itself. Now, with the help of the table and the graph, you could determine what is now the effect of the quantity to the total revenue, or how are the both factors related with one another. So look at this table itself. Okay, as the quantities here increases from 0 to 6, total revenue also behaves the same, but only at a certain point and then suddenly declines. So you could tell that at the very beginning, total revenue is positively related to quantity, or quantity is positively related to the total revenue. But on the latter part, you could now also tell that the quantity is negatively related to total revenue, or the other way around. Okay, which is now very evident to our graph itself, because as you look at the graph, it decreases actually, reaches a certain maximum area, and then suddenly it will decline. Now, there are actually possible reasons why the graph behaves like this, but we will go further on the analysis part, okay? And what do you think so could be some reason why does a certain this certain point with this relationship, why does it have to reach a certain point of a maximum and then declines again? There are also some reasons. So if you go back or recall your basic economics, there are factors that affecting them, such as those as the non-price determinants, or the different market factors regardless of the price itself. Okay, there. So now let's proceed. What is a revenue? A revenue is the income. Okay, it is the most basic. What do you call this one? The most basic factor that you actually hear from a certain firms or for a certain organization, especially those on the business side. Now, this revenue is actually affected by what we call here the price itself and then the demand itself. How does the price or the demand affects the revenue? Let's proceed to its analysis. Now take note, from the equation that we have mentioned, revenue is price times the quantity, right? And the demand here comes or rooted from the law of demand itself, wherein the law of demand expresses that as a price increase, quantity declines. As price decrease, quantity rises. So that means the demand here has something to do with the price and the quantity, which is also directly related to the price. Wherein if you're going to look at the two factors affecting the demand and the price itself, they are directly related to the revenue. That is the reason that price and demand directly affects your revenue itself. Okay, so what could happen to the revenue if there would be a changes or increases in the price or decreases in the price or etc. Okay, now you could now see that on the example here on the analysis. Okay, suppose that a certain microchip industry has a whole consisting of a manufacturer in question and half dozen major competitors. So with this kind of company, of course, they want to expand further. Cost is inevitable. Okay? And then the cost there has something to do with the price. Okay? So that means if the cost increases, what will happen to the price? It affects the price itself. So therefore, as the cost in this company increases, it also increases the price of the product. So if the price of the product increases, what do you think will happen to the demand? Okay? Go back to the law of demand. As it says there, as price increase, what will happen to the quantity? It declines. So that means if the price increases, quantity declines. So therefore, even at a higher price and a lower quantity, demand will now decline. Diba? So if the demand declines, revenue will now also decline. Remember, even at the higher prices, if those people buying the product is lesser and lesser, the revenue will decline. Okay? Only if, okay, only if the price does not actually surpasses too much the increase or the decline in the prices. Kasi pag napakataas yung presyo, kahit maliit na maliit yung quantity mo, there would be a slight, very slight tendency of an increase in the revenue. But sooner or later, it still declines. Okay? And so that's how we analyze the relationships of the revenue, the price, and the demands, which could be indicated through the functions itself. Okay? There. So how does the revenue react? First one, which we had seen that the revenue behaves or increases at first, reaches a maximum here and then declines. But actually, it will continue to decline and decline if we pursue further and further. Why so? Take note that a certain machine who does the certain production in a certain company has a limitation, has a capacity itself. So if you go beyond the capacity of those machines or capitals that is needed in the production, then of course it will give up. That is the reason quantities that they are producing is declining, which now affects the revenue and it will decline. Okay? Parang tao din yan. Okay? Meron din tayong mga limitations. Kahit basa tayo ng basa para lang makapasa sa exam, pero pag nalampasan natin or na-reach na natin ang capacity natin tapos tinutuloy pa rin natin, useless pa rin yung binabasa natin because it will not contribute to our own knowledge. That's why do not go beyond because it will decline. Okay? Ganun din yan. So, that as quantity increase and price increase, revenue increase. As quantity decrease and price decrease, revenue decrease. But others may happen even if quantity increase, okay, and price decrease. What do you think will happen to the revenue? It will increase. But if the quantity increases, yet the prices decrease and decrease, revenue still declines. Remember, the price gives us an income. If there is no price, no income. Okay? So that's how we deal with it. So take note with the relationship of the three again. They are all related. And the quantity and the price directly affects the revenue itself. Okay, what's next is we have, of course, the cost. Cost is, of course, a one factor that every business or organization cannot avoid because without a cost, okay, they cannot employ, they cannot also produce, and they cannot operate itself. So therefore, cost is actually inevitable. Okay, we cannot avoid it. Even if you are not operating, there is still a cost. Parang sa isang bahay lang natin, kahit hindi natin ginamit ang ating electricity, why do we have to pay a certain kind of amount? Because that is still the minimum or what we still pay to the company that is still operating wherein we are borrowing their services. That is the reason that we have to pay. And those costs are considered what we call the total fixed cost. The total fixed cost, these are overhead cost or sunk cost. Why so? Because they are a certain cost that even if the business or organization does not provide a service, does not open for operation, they still have to pay such. Okay? And let's, for example, we have to pay some maintenance, we have to pay even our rents, we have to pay our own interest in a certain bank. So those are still inevitable and we have to pay them. That's why they are called total fixed costs. The other cost also involved in the cost function is we have the total variable cost. Total variable cost, these are the costs involved in every factors of production that is needed in the operation itself, such as the labor, such as the land, such as the raw materials, or anything that changes in a certain company that we have to pay for the contribution of the operation of a certain organization. So every time we pay or we spend for these factors, And the cost that are involved or that is called for this one is considered to be your total variable cost. So this total variable cost varies with the output that a certain organization produces. Okay, so the more output that a certain business needs, the more resources that is also needed. So the more resources that we do, the more expenditures that we have to spend. So therefore, total variable cost increases. Hmm? Like that. How about the total fixed cost? Does it also increase? It does not seem to increase because it is a fixed cost. Hmm? Okay. So therefore, the addition of the total fixed cost and the total variable cost compose our total cost itself. Okay. Now, total costs, are there any costs that are involved in here? There are, of course. Okay, but the total cost is considered to be the total payment, total expenditures that we have to spend to the entire process of the production. But there are certain costs also involved in here. We have here the average cost and then the marginal cost. The average cost is the cost per unit of output, meaning this is the cost that we spend in producing one unit, or this is the cost in providing one service. Okay, how about the marginal cost? What is this? From the word itself, marginal, it always means additional. So this means a marginal cost, this is the cost in adding one service or in adding one output to the total product. Okay, so let's have a simple example so that we could actually determine what is this. So look at this table itself. In the production process, if a certain organization will not produce any good, they still have to pay an amount of 20, or let's say 20 pesos. So why so? As I mentioned a while ago, this is the total fixed cost, because these are the costs that even if they do not produce, they do not operate, they have to pay. Such as, again, we have the rent, the interest, or even the maintenance in a certain operations or certain companies. Now, if the company will have to produce one output, they will spend a total of 140 pesos. So in that case, how much did they spend in producing that one output? They actually spend 140. This is what we call your average cost itself. From 0 to 1, how much is the additional cost that they incur or that they spend just to come up with one output? That is 140 minus 20 divided by 1 minus 0, is which is 1, will give you a 120. So that means in adding one output, they incur an additional amount of 120 pesos. So that is how we know how to deal with the marginal cost and then the average cost. Okay, so as we goes on, okay, so from an output of 1, they added one output again to come up with a total of 2. How much did they spend in producing 2 output? It is 160. But from those 2 outputs, how much did they spend in one of them? It is 80. That is 160 divided by 2, which is 80. But from one output to two output, how much did they add? It is 1. They add 1 again. So how much did they spend for this additional output? That is the 20 pesos in here. Okay, so that is the additional cost, which is considered to be marginal. How did we obtain again this? 160 minus 140 is 20. 2 minus 1 is 1. So 20 divided by 1, we have your 20 in here. So that is how to deal with your marginal cost. Again, interpretation. Average cost is the output cost per unit. Marginal cost is the additional cost in adding one output. Okay, so there's the difference. Got it? Next is if you want to see the a better interpretation or how could you actually interpret them properly, then by using the graph itself, you could say that total cost actually increases as you increases your output, which is correct. But why is it that average cost and marginal cost behaves in a different way? They have to decrease, reaches a certain point, and then increases again, which is also the same with the average cost. The reason is that at first, we need only, let's say for example, we need only one machine. Now, if we need one labor to operate that machine, then that means we have to pay the one labor. Since iisa lang yung labor na nag-ooperate sa ating one machine, kukunti lang yung produce niya. But at least, we do not need to pay more. Okay, so mababa pa rin ang ating gastos. Okay, now if we need two person again to operate one machine, then therefore the cost increases. Okay, but why is it declines? Why does it declines? It is because the cost the cost involved is spreading to a higher or to a greater variables. Okay? But if you employ more resources, then it will suddenly reaches, of course, the minimum. Wherein that means if it is already minimum, the machine now is operating functionally and all of the resources are working on their own special work itself. So, walang nasasayang. Lahat ng kanilang specialty ay na-utilize already. Kaya we have your minimum cost in here. But why does it have to increase again? Again, it reaches already the capacity. So that means if you employ more people in a certain machine area, then that means it's too much, overcrowded. That means you're paying too much than what the machine can produce. Therefore, the cost will have to increase. Okay, so that is the reason why the average and the marginal cost have to decline first and then increases again. Or ilagay natin sa simple analysis. Pag kunwari gumagawa tayo ng isang table. In making a table, pag mag-isa lang ang ating carpenter, then that means the carpenter will have to use, what you call this one, we have to use kailangan niyang gamitin yung mga martilyo niya, lagarin niya, tapos sooner or later, yung furnishing pa, diba, mga ganyan. So, pag lahat yun gagawin niya, talagang pakonti pa yon. So, tsaka, yung cost pa rin is, kukunti pa rin binabayaran natin kasi mag-isa lang yung resources. Pag nagdagdag tayo ng isang carpenter, syempre, madidistribute yung trabaho. Okay? Pag nadidistribute yung trabaho, medyo mas malami na yung nagagawa nilang table. Okay? Still, they could produce more than the resources that we are paying. Now, if we again employ, and more than what we need already, meron na tayong nagpo-furnish, meron na tayong taga-lagarin, taga-martilyo, tapos meron pa tayong kinuhang maraming carpenters, then that means walang nagagawa na yung ibang carpenters. So therefore, we are just paying them, and yet they're not doing much job. So that is already the reason why does this cost have to increase itself. Okay, so that is the reason. Next one is we have the profit. The profit here is the difference between the total revenue and the total cost, which is actually the very important one because the profit here is the amount of income that a certain owners of an organization have to save, or it's either used for further investment. Okay, so the more profit, the more income that they have, the more income that they will also use for investment. Ayan. And this is also the reason why a certain person have to enter a certain organization or have to put up a certain business. It is because of the profit itself. Yeah. That's profit. So there are different profits, definitions of profit that we may encounter. You have the business profit, economic profit, and then the other one is the opportunity cost, which is also considered as at one point a profit itself. A business profit, this is the profit um, that we earn, uh, which involves of the physical cost in the production. Parang it does not involve a certain kind of sacrifice. Yung mga cost natin in sacrificing is it does not involve in here. But on the economic profit, it involves those costs that we had sacrificed. Parang sa isang accounting, kung ano yung nagastos mo, yun yung record natin. Kung ano man yung sinakripisyo mo para magastos yun, hindi na natin i-include. But in the economic profit, they include what they had sacrificed to spend those. Okay, just to determine the economic profit. But what about the opportunity cost? This is actually the cost, okay, or the value ng isang resource in its alternative use. If I did not spend my money and uses in that other factors, how much could I earn? That is what we call your opportunity cost. Got it? So business profit, these are just the explicit cost itself, while the economic profit involves not only the explicit but the implicit, which the implicit one involves the sacrifice cost, and then the opportunity cost is the value of what must be the alternative or the best alternative of what we had given up. Hmm? So profit here is very important. It is because we could determine how much a certain industry or a certain organization have to go further through a high profit or through a low profit. Does a certain business have to close the business if they have a low profit, or just they shut down? So the profit itself will give them a certain decision what would be their strategy to do next in their own operations itself. Okay? Ganyan ating profit. So, other than those basic expressions that we encounter in the analysis of the economics, there are other models also that we encounter. The use of what we call the calculus. The very basic calculus that we're going to use here is the differentiation itself. Okay, the differentiation wherein we have to make a difference between one variable comparing from the zero value to the highest value, or how to eliminate a certain value to come up with the best options itself. Okay, so that is for the rules of differentiation. There are different rules regarding the uh, economic rules of differentiation. We have the constant function rule, wherein it is the difference of a certain uh, function which is always be equivalent to a certain zero. Well, that means what could be the derivative of a certain function that will give you an amount of zero. That is a certain variable that does not involve to another variable. If that variable stands alone, then that means it has a constant value. But if that variable is dependent to the other function or other factor, then that means it would have a difference. Okay? So the other one is we have the power function rule. This is a certain rules of differentiation wherein multiplication is involved. The sum and difference rule, wherein it is also a differentiation rule that is involved in addition and difference. And we have also one. We have the quotient rule and then the product rule. Product rule also is somewhat on the multiplication. Quotient rule is in the division. And then the chain rule, this is a difference between two independent or one dependent and another dependent function itself. Okay, now how in dealing with these different mathematical rules, then we will don't worry, we will go for them one by one later on. So I'm just introducing to you the other kinds of uh, mathematical expression that we use in order for us to express economic relationship. But with the use of this differentiation or the calculus, these are the things that they always have to attain. Okay? Pinaka-importante dapat ma-achieve nila. That is finding the value of the x through differentiating it from the function y. And with the use of the second derivatives or a higher differentiation, we could determine if the value that we have found is at the minimum or as at a maximum. Yan. So that is the most functions or the objectives that a certain use of calculus have to achieve it.